Hello, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we sweat to death.
Because currently we're sitting in a room that is, I'm going to lick my finger and see the air, like 99 degrees in here.
The outside is 86 and it feels like an oven in here. Like we're definitely in like a little bit of a sauna.
Yes. So we do have a fan on. So if you hear a slight little hum, at least you're not sitting in a hot ass room.
Yeah, be glad you're not us today. Apparently, Spokane decided that it's going to be July at the end of May.
Oh, yeah.
So it's supposed to be in the mid-90s the whole week. Cute.
Which I like. Sorry.
Do you like smoke and wildfires?
No.
Then you do not want it to be 90 right now. You want it to be a nice 75
I didn't plan on getting yelled at today. Okay,
so you have a YouTuber you want to share.
Yes, I've never been a YouTube person. I've never been like, oh, this is the person that I go to. There's a YouTuber, her name is Jaime French, and I am fucking in love. So she is a makeup YouTuber, tutorial person. I don't know, what do you call that? I don't know. And she was getting really bored after just doing just plain old makeup tutorials. And so she came up with this new thing called Makeup in Movies. And she reviews movies while she does her makeup, which, by the way, she tries new products. She is an amazing makeup artist and she's funny as hell. So, but the movies that she reviews are so bad. So she just reviewed the Buttercream Gang.
I've never even heard of that.
I watched that movie as a kid and it's hilarious the way she goes through it. Like, Can't Hardly Wait. What was the one with Kelly Clarkson that when she first won American Idol?
Oh, Kelly and Justin.
From Justin to Kelly.
Yeah, from Justin to Kelly.
She reviews that one.
Whatever happened to that fellow?
I don't know. I think he's like a reporter for ET, but Honey and Glitter.
I've never seen Glitter.
Me neither.
Abby and I have been talking about watching it as like a fun weekend movie situation. So maybe we'll get on that and then watch her YouTube.
Yeah. She goes in depth. Like, she's literally watching the people in the background. She makes sure that she knows who the director is, the actors, and her satire and her comedy and her commentary is quite enjoyable. That
reminds me of one of my favorite podcasts, which is called How Did This Get Made?
Oh, yeah. You've talked about that before.
Oh, my God. In fact, I just listened to the episode where I was actually at the show in Seattle.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I would never normally do that with any show where I like went to it and then listened to it. But one, it has been almost it has been a whole year, more than a year, obviously.
That was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah, and so I didn't really remember it that well. And then also, it was so fucking funny. Like, I literally laughed out loud in my car. Like, people around me were like, what is up with that person? Because I was like cackling to myself. So I think that there's something about watching bad movies and like it kind of feels like a communal experience even if you're the only one in the room.
Yes.
That's what I love about shows like that. It's like you feel like, yes! And you're like yelling at the screen like, yes, that's so funny!
I also like too how she points out, because a lot of these late 1990s, early 2000s movies were really like trying to push like such a toxic relationship, like this is what your relationship should be for two people trying to fall in love. And it's like, no, that's actually really bad. And you're really mean and you're putting up with like really bad stuff and your friend is gross. And
yeah, the 80s were like that too.
Yeah.
Like whenever I go back now and I look at, like I watch stuff that I loved as a teenager, which was in the, late 90s and early aughts. So those movies were already old, but like they were still so fucking popular to the millennials, like things like 16 Candles.
Oh, yeah.
Which has like a fucking really bad date rape scene in it.
It does.
And I'm like, ah!
Yeah, and then it like romanticizes it and everything.
But even just the other day, somebody in my one of my group chats mentioned Easy A. And Abby and I just rewatched Easy A not that long ago. That has Emma Stone.
Yeah.
And I remember it being like so progressive and feminist and cool and sex positive and all of this stuff. And I rewatched it with Abby like probably 2 or 3 months ago. And I was like horrified.
Ugh. I've never seen it. So,
well, I loved that movie. I will say there's lots of really great stuff in it. But like there's also stuff like really kind of homophobic stuff.
Okay.
I didn't care for. So, yeah, it was a little problematic.
Yeah. Well, Jaime French points all of that out.
How do you spell Jamie?
Jamie.
And so if somebody wanted to watch her YouTube, we would just go on YouTube, just search Jaime French
Jaime
makeup.
French makeup and movies.
All right. Now you guys all have a good recommendation.
Literally just been in bed in the morning when I wake up and I'm just like, wonder what Jamie's put up today.
See, I'm obsessed with skincare YouTube. So I have 2 really great YouTube recommendations for if you're into skincare. One of them is this really great older woman, I believe she's 58, who has incredible skin.
Ooh.
And is also super forthcoming with like, these are the procedures I've had done.
Okay.
So that you know that it's like, well, yeah, you've had some help.
Yeah.
It's not just your serums.
But that's awesome, though. That's realistic.
Yes. And that one is hot and flashy.
Nice. Oh my God, that's a dope ass name.
Right? It's a great name. And also, when she reviews makeup, like a foundation, she has like Foundation Friday for over 50.
Oh.
And I'm not over 50, obviously, but I really love how thoroughly she tests foundation. So she'll put the foundation on and then she'll she'll be in front of her really great lighting system. But then she'll be like, but that's not realistic. I don't sit in front of my lighting all the time.
Yeah.
So she also like takes her camera and shows it under like harsh kitchen lighting and in light coming through a window. And then she'll go out in like a full sun and show you what it looks like in full sun. So you can see that like sometimes, and also she'll do a flash photo. So you can see if there's, flashback.
Yeah, like if the tone doesn't match when the light hits. Okay.
Or if it like washes out when it's in the flash. I just love how thorough that is. Like,
that's helpful.
It's super helpful. So it's not funny like Jaime French, but it is very helpful. And the other one I like to watch is Doctorly, which is 2 dermatologists who are very good looking. Talking about, niacinamide and sunscreen. I'm like a sunscreen fetishist at this point.
I know. I like how you have like your little sunscreen like twisty tubey thing and you're just like putting it on all the time.
Oh yeah, I have on my person, I usually have like 3 different kinds of sunscreen. I have like spray sunscreen for my body. I have this powder sunscreen if I like want to put powder on. I also have lip sunscreen.
Oof, that's intense.
And I put sunscreen on every morning.
One thing too about Jaime French, she'll get a product and it's not good.
Oh, I love it.
But she'll tell you it's not good. She'll like put it up to the camera and be like, look at this shit. And then she'll make it work. So like works with it. So yeah, shows you how to like, nice. Maybe if it's too light of a concealer, maybe go in with like a little flash of bronzer or something. So that's helpful.
That is cool.
So who do you have today?
I have an incredible person.
Okay, I'm ready.
That took me not only quite a bit of time to research, but also I would say a lot of education outside of this person.
Okay.
Do you know who Kitty Cone is?
No.
Don't you love that name, though?
Yeah.
Kitty Cone?
Yeah.
It just rolls right off the tongue. Kitty Cone was a political organizer and disability rights activist who organized the longest nonviolent occupation of a federal building in U.S. history.
Holy shit. Mm-hmm. I'm ready.
Her real name was actually Curtis. I've never heard of a woman named Curtis.
I would have to say I haven't either.
Yeah. So her full name was Curtis Selden Cone. She was born on April 7th, 1944 to Hutchinson Cone Jr. and Molly Mattis Cone, and they lived in Champaign, Illinois. Curtis, who was known by everyone in her family and outside of her family as Kit or Kitty, was really fortunate because they were a really wealthy family.
Okay.
Like wealthy.
Like stupid wealthy?
Wealthy and very connected.
Okay.
Her father actually grew up attending really posh private boarding schools in DC.
Okay.
So I read this really fantastic 322-page long interview.
Holy shit.
That took place over 2 years with Kitty.
Okay.
And in it, she talked about how like I think the one that her father attended was actually the one that Al Gore's son also attended. So that's the level that we're talking about here.
Okay.
Her father attended private boarding schools in Washington, D.C. and eventually went to Harvard Law School.
Oof.
What he really wanted to do was he wanted to be an ornithologist.
What's an ornithologist?
Those are bird scientists.
Oh, that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, but his dad was like, you can't be a professional bird watcher.
But Dad, the birds.
And that is why he attended law school. But he actually didn't really love law, and he ended up going into the army after World War II began. And that means that when she was born in 1944, he was actually stationed overseas, and she did not meet him until she was around 2.5 years old.
Oh my God, like at all?
At all.
Whoa.
She never met her father during that time because he was in the war.
That's crazy.
So the way Kitty describes her family, they seem to me extremely waspy.
Okay.
As in white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not familiar with that. They were very upper-class white people who went to private schools and never talked about anything serious, you know?
So this is the opening scene of Dirty Dancing.
Yes. Oh my God, that's perfect. They are those people.
Okay.
So one of the things that they just didn't talk about was like, it was like ingrained in them to not talk about was like, if anything was going wrong in your body, it was like, that's not something you talk about.
Okay.
So that was a problem because her body was beginning to develop in ways that indicated that something wasn't quite right. But they just ignored it. And it wasn't until she was in first grade and her teacher was like, Kitty only walks on her toes.
Okay.
And that's not good.
No.
So we need to not have her do that. Like, you should take her to a doctor. And they finally convinced her mom that she should, in fact, take her to a fucking doctor and find out why she can't walk on her heels.
How terrible.
Yeah. And her family had noticed, obviously. It's not like you, like, wouldn't notice your child only walking on their toes. Mm-hmm. But it was just one of those things where they don't talk about it. This is what she said about her family. If there's something going on with the body, my family just sort of ignores it. They didn't make a big deal out of stuff, and something has to be really serious before they deal with it.
Jeez.
Her mother does eventually take her to the doctor, and the first diagnosis she gets is cerebral palsy. That's incorrect. She doesn't have CP.
Okay.
The doctors that Kitty went to were often, well, always actually VA doctors because they got free healthcare through the VA, right? Mm-hmm. But that also meant that they weren't very good because the VA was very historically underfunded, continues to be historically underfunded, and they just didn't get great care. And she did not have CP. What she had was a disease called muscular dystrophy.
Okay.
And muscular dystrophy is actually a group of diseases. There's a whole bunch of different kinds. But the basic is that muscular dystrophy damages and weakens the muscles over time. There are different kinds of muscular dystrophy, some of which are more intense, more progressive sooner, and some are like take longer.
Yeah, just like from case to case.
Well, just different kinds. It's like one of them, it's like by the time a kid is like 4 or 5 years old, they're basically, their muscles have given up. But some people will be able to walk into adulthood, and then sometime in their 20s or 30s, they'll be wheelchair bound.
Okay.
So it seems to me that most people end up losing the ability to walk if they have muscular dystrophy, but some people it's sooner than others. But because she was misdiagnosed, first with cerebral palsy, and then later on with polio, which she also didn't have, obviously, she then got a lot of bad treatment.
It sounds like they're just guessing.
Absolutely. So Kitty was put in casts on both of her legs because her heel cords in her feet were tight because they were weakening and getting damaged. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to stretch her heel cords out, which sounds incredibly painful.
That sounds so painful.
Then her father was at some point stationed in Tokyo, so the whole family moved to Japan, and she lived in Tokyo. And in Tokyo, that's when they diagnosed her with polio, and they started performing surgeries on her, including both of her hips. And they did one at a time. And so the whole time that she was having these surgeries, she was bedridden, because obviously when you have
your
surgery,
hips are your core, like you can't move.
Yeah, you can't move. But those are the actual opposite thing you should do for muscular dystrophy. If you have muscular dystrophy, you should be actively using your muscles for as long as you can and trying to strengthen them to try to make them last longer. So being bedridden actually progressed the disease faster for her.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And she was 11 and was like, this needs to stop. Stop. This is making things worse. She could feel in her body that it was making her worse, but the doctors wouldn't listen to her. So she told her parents, and her parents were like, I think the doctors know best.
Oh, gosh.
So once again, she just wasn't listened to. Kitty's family moved around a lot. I mean, I already mentioned that she was living in Tokyo. She lived in Florida, Georgia, Tokyo, Kentucky, Illinois, DC,
all over.
All over. So she didn't have very many roots or long-term friendships or anything like that. But one of the few people in her life that actually did stick around and was really important to her was, nanny's not quite the right word, but it's probably the closest approximation.
Okay. Well, caregiver?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, she was a child, so I mean, it's like a nanny, but she also did household chores and things like that.
Okay.
And that was a Black woman named Helen. And this is, I mean, if she's 11 or so, because Helen moved into the family house when Kitty was quite young. I think she was 6 or so. So that was 1950.
Okay.
And she moved with them as they moved across the country. And Kitty said later on that, I mean, when she was a child, Helen seemed like this sophisticated older adult, but she thinks she was probably only 18 or 19 when she first moved in.
Oh, wow. So young.
Yeah. So she was she was basically a big sister. Because they were always together, Kitty started to see at an early age what racism really was and what Jim Crow laws were. And she couldn't quite conceptualize the thing that was happening. She just was like, well, why can't Helen come on the ride with me? I don't understand. Or when they would go on a family vacation, Helen would often go with them, if they went on a road trip. And the family would stay in one hotel, but
she'd stay in another.
Yeah, Helen wasn't allowed to stay with them. And she would be like, I don't understand.
Why? Yeah.
And for the most part, that, she thought it was wrong. So she would always say something. One time she wanted to get on this carnival ride, and she wanted obviously Helen to ride the ride with her, and they were like, she can't get on the ride with you. And Kitty was like, why can't she get on the ride? And it was indignant about it. Well, if she can't get on the ride, then I'm not going to ride the ride.
Oh gosh.
But and I think she knew obviously to some extent what that meant, but a very sheltered, white, rich child who just doesn't.
Who has no idea of what that's about.
Nothing. And, as was pretty common for her family and their stature, she attended mostly private schools. She was an excellent student, incredibly intelligent, top of the class. When she ended up in Kentucky, though, she attended public school for the first time. And she talks about being snobby, because she was like, oh my God, this is what you're learning?
Oh no.
I learned this 4 years ago.
Oh, shit.
And she was just appalled by...
Well, if you're in this one world and then you get to see these little slivers of other things, of course you're going to comment and mock or,
And I think also because she's walking into these classrooms and she's so much more advanced than these other students because she's been in these really amazing preparatory schools. She also starts to notice how openly racist everyone is because it's Kentucky.
Yeah.
And that was new to her, because even though her family very much was probably racist, it wasn't the same kind of racism. In fact, she talks about her family being part of the Southern aristocracy.
Oh, okay.
So that means that they were obviously racist, but they were racist in a dignified way.
Gosh.
Like, for example, her father would have never used the N-word. That is an uncouth thing to say. But that doesn't mean he didn't harbor the same ideas behind the word. You know what I mean?
You're still racist even though if you don't vocalize your racism.
Yes. And I'm sure he vocalized it in different ways. Like, he didn't see a problem with Helen having to stay in a different hotel.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He just was never going to use the N-word because that is rude. So she
boggled. Sorry, I'm boggled.
so her upbringing is, different kind of racism.
Yeah, and I bet a different kind of judgment and
one that's a lot more, I think, insidious because it is hidden.
Yeah.
But when she gets around these public school students who are like openly dropping the N-word all the time and so on and so forth, she was like, "What the fuck?" and really started calling people out. She kind of became known as a wet blanket. Oh, because she would just constantly be like, so I can't remember what she talked about. Like, she was over at a friend's house and they were watching TV and they'd watched some movie where a black man was like wrongly accused of something. And at the end, it came out that this rich white guy was the one who did the crime. And she like pauses it and is like, "See? This is why black people, blah, 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 blah."
Oh, gosh.
And everybody in the room was like, ugh.
No, that's like good on her, though, because she's not afraid.
It seems to me like she had a sort of born sense of justice, even though she didn't necessarily have the education, the experiences that would help shape her into a better person. So she's moving through junior high and high school, and as she's doing so, she's losing more of her mobility. She can still walk, but it's becoming increasingly more difficult for her. And this becomes a real big sticking point when she enters into a different private school. It's called the Mount Vernon Seminary School in Washington, D.C. And this was like a big deal school. Like, this is where you want to go.
Okay.
So the headmistress met with Kitty, when she first got there and said that she was only allowed to take a bath in the house mother's bathroom.
Why?
Probably because of adult supervision. Because they didn't want the liability of her falling.
Oh, okay.
But the bathtub was way too big for her, so she couldn't get in and out of it. And she was like, "Why would I, like, this is going to make me fall."
Yeah.
Is to have to be in this bathroom. And also that means that she's completely removed from everybody her own age.
Yeah. And also people are going to notice that. It's going to cause some social strife.
And she, like, at this school, she lived in a suite style. So, like, there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. And each bedroom had 2 girls in it. And they shared a bathroom. So she could get in and out of the bathroom in her suite and in the bathtub. So what she did was she just said, like, "I'm just going to bathe in here and I'll make sure roommate's around. So if I fall or whatever, they can help me up."
Yeah.
And so she had this roommate that just sort of like always made sure that everything was going okay. But that was like against the rules, right? The headmistress had specifically said, you have to bathe in this house mother's bathtub. Another thing that she told her was that she wasn't allowed to go to certain places on campus. And one of those places was this hockey field, because the hockey field was like down a little slope.
Okay.
And I believe by this time she was walking with a cane, and she didn't want her to go down this hill because she might fall. But there were like whole school events where everybody went onto the hockey field and she would just have to be sitting in her dorm.
Like somebody couldn't lend an elbow, like if they were that concerned.
And there was this all school competition one day, and she was actually, I think, in the competition. Like, it was some like, and she was very involved in school activities. Like, she was not like a wallflower. And so she wanted to be down on the hockey field, right? So she went down there on her own and like nothing happened. She was fine. But after that, the headmistress realized that Kitty's not following these restrictions that she'd placed on her. So they expel her. They kick her out of school.
Oh, that is so against the law.
It is now.
Yeah.
It was not then, because there was no such law.
Holy shit.
So this is crazy also, because at this school,
Yeah.
She did the PSAT, right? Like that's the before the SAT. She had the highest score in the whole school.
Wow.
But
the entire school.
The entire school. But because she wanted to go in her own bathtub and walk down a field, she had to be kicked out. So when Kitty eventually graduated from high school, she actually attended 5 high schools in the course of her 4 years of high school.
It's a lot.
She was dead set on attending an Ivy League school. She really wanted to go to one of the 7 Sisters, which are the girls only, women's only campuses in the Ivy Leagues. But none of those university campuses were accessible at all in any way.
Wow.
If she had gone there, because at this point, she could get around, like if she was in her bedroom or whatever and wanted to go to the bathroom, she could walk to the bathroom, although labored. But if she wanted to go any distance of any kind, like across a campus, she would need to have a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And there was nothing about those campuses that was accessible. There was not a single building that didn't have grand staircases going into them, and there were no ramps, there were nothing. So she was just incapable of being able to go. What, is somebody going to
carry her or something like that?
Right. And they'd have to carry her and her wheelchair everywhere she went, so she could not go.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to live. So she was pushed by her family to attend the University of Illinois in Champaign because it was like one of the only universities, or maybe the only university, that had specific accommodations for severely disabled people.
Okay.
So they were all, like, the university had this thing called the University of Illinois Rehabilitation Program. And all of the disabled students were required to enter that program. And it was not great.
Rehabilitation program?
Yeah, that it doesn't sound bad, right? Like, I was like, okay, because like it said, like, if you have a required PE course, instead of going to the regular PE class, you would go to the rehab center and they would do like muscle work with you.
Okay.
Which is like, okay, not great. I don't love the idea of being segregated.
Yeah.
But like maybe it was well-meaning, but it was created by able-bodied people for disabled people.
Mm-hmm.
And the history of the way in which people in society treated people with disabilities was basically one of 2 ways. Either they were reviled as like some kind of aberration and they were like contagious and gross or whatever, or they were treated like babies.
Yeah.
Oh, that poor. They were, very
they were pitied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very paternalistic, very infantilizing. And to me, that program kind of fell under that.
Okay.
It was very much like, we need to control you. We need to know what you're doing.
We know what's best for you.
Yes. But it actually kind of like had really contradictory policies. So the first thing that every student who was disabled had to do is they had to, first off, be part of this program. They weren't allowed to like opt out. And 2, they had to come early to school before the other students arrived, and they had to go through what they called functional training week.
Okay. What does that entail?
Functional training week was where all of these disabled students would have to prove that they could do everything for themselves. Like, go to the bathroom.
How invasive.
Mm-hmm. So in a room full of people, they would have like, I don't know if they had like, I don't know if they followed them to the bathroom or what, but like they had to prove that they could transfer from a wheelchair to the toilet. They had to prove they could transfer from their wheelchair to a bed. They had to prove all of these things.
Like they're making it up that this is how they live their lives. And they have to show people like.
But even if you needed help, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like if you were the kind of person who maybe you needed some assistance going to the bathroom, like just to be lifted over to the toilet and then lifted back, like that's okay. You can still attend college.
Yeah.
Doesn't
so
affect
if you
your
can't
brain.
do that, if you're going to inconvenience any of us with your disability, then you can't go here.
Right.
Shit.
So that was not great. And in fact, Kitty's told specific stories about people that she knew on campus. Like, first off, it fucking snows in Chicago a lot. And it is wet, heavy snow because of the lake. And they were in wheelchairs. like navigating across this fucking campus in these wheelchairs. And if they were seen getting help from someone, like if somebody pushed them to help them get out of like a rut, they were seen as weak by the university rehab program.
Oh my gosh.
They would be reprimanded for it. Like, what the fuck?
For somebody helping them?
Yes. You had to prove that you
And then
could
you're
do it
controlling
yourself.
your other students that way too, of someone who would maybe volunteer to be like, hey, we're going to the same class.
Yeah. Well, it would also tell that student who is potentially helping that those people don't deserve your help. They don't need your help. You know,
And you'll get in
then
trouble.
later, like if you come across a disabled person who cannot help themselves for whatever reason in a situation, you're going to judge them like, well, he can't even help himself. Mm-hmm. You know, it just sets up a really toxic environment for
For everybody.
Because then the people who really do need some help will never ask for help.
And the people who want to help won't offer.
Right. Terrible. I don't love it.
No.
And so because at this point she could still stand up and walk a little, and the bed they had to practice on for functional training week was a high bed. So she just like stood up and then sat on it. Mm-hmm. But when she got into her dorm room, the bed was actually much lower. And she really did need to transfer from the chair to the bed and just had no idea how to do it. Because they didn't teach them how to do it. They just expected them to do it. And so she gets into her dorm room and is like, well, I actually need to know how to transfer to this fucking bed. Mm-hmm. And thankfully there were, she was in a dorm room with other, or in a dorm with other disabled folks. And she met a woman there named Mary Lou Breslin, who she would become lifelong friends with, who also became a really big activist, disability rights activist. And Mary Lou was the one who came in and like taught her and like kind of just showed her the ropes for a while. Mm-hmm. Just like showed her like, this is how you do this is how you do that. This is how you do this. So Kitty was like, came from this very conservative background, very rich and white and sheltered and privileged. And so her first like semester of college, she very much fell in line with what you would expect a kid like her. Mm-hmm. She was, she became a cheerleader. They were called like the Giz sports or something. I did not care for the name because I kept seeing jizz in my mind and I was like, yeah. But it was Gizz. I'm not crazy. That looks like jizz.
That does look like jizz.
But they were like because the University of Illinois in Champaign had like this whole rehab program. They had wheelchair sports.
Okay.
So she became a wheelchair cheerleader.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool. She also ran for and won a spot on the student senate.
Wow.
Like she was super involved on campus.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of her first year of college, her mother died of cancer.
Oh, no.
Kitty had no idea her mom even had cancer.
Because she didn't talk about it.
Because their fucking family kept it from her.
Oh, my gosh. That is tragic.
Yeah. Nobody called to say, like, your mom is towards her end of times. Like, why don't you come see her before she goes? Nothing. So she left school and ended up staying home for the summer and I believe also that fall semester and like helped her brother out. She had a brother named George and he was younger than her. So she stayed behind and like made sure everything got handled. When she returned to school, she met a young man named Rudy. Rudy was, I think, a little older than her, like in college, like a year older or something. And he was severely disabled from polio and was super active in the Young Democrats and the NAACP on campus. Kitty still considered herself a Republican at the time, but she did care about issues that had to do with race and civil rights. Mm-hmm. So he was like, gotcha. Not only did he really want her to like join the Democrats and become more progressive, he also really wanted to date her.
Oh.
And so he was like, he would like bait her into
oh my gosh,
debates.
Arguments.
And honestly, he won. So he didn't manage to win her over, which I was really actually quite surprised by. But I think that's because she really kind of was malleable in how she thought about things. Mm-hmm. I think it's really easy to sort of take somebody who's already got a foundation of kind of believing in justice and be like, okay, but you really can't be a Republican if you believe in justice. It's just not possible. So she joined the Young Democrats.
Oh, gasp.
But she became disillusioned with the Democratic Party almost immediately.
Why?
Because she had campaigned for and voted for Lyndon Johnson.
Okay.
He ran against Barry Goldwater, and that was like the big election. And, you know, she was very passionate about people voting for Lyndon Johnson because Barry Goldwater was very adamant that he was going to bomb the fuck out of Vietnam.
Oh.
So she was like, we got to get Lyndon Johnson in there because, you know, we don't want to have this war. But then as soon as Lyndon Johnson was in office, he went back on his campaign promises and he bombed the fuck out of Vietnam.
Yeah. I could see her, though, from learning a little bit about her personality. As like, she's kind of an all-in person. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, if she's really rolling with something, she's going to go with it.
Yeah, she does have a tendency, I think, to go like full bore. Mm-hmm. So she joined the anti-war movement on campus, and she also joined the Students for Democratic Society and Friends of SNCC. So SNCC was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was the college version of MLK's organization.
Okay.
Kind of. I mean, it was started by John Lewis, who died last year. Amazing, incredible man. Mm-hmm. And, there's that famous photograph of him being beaten at the other side of the Selma Bridge. Yeah. So she joined the Friends of SNCC. So SNCC was exclusively, I believe, black students. And so the Friends of SNCC were white or other students who wanted to ally with. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty great. I love that she did that. And in fact, did some of the things that I've been doing myself in the last couple of years, like raising money for bailing out civil rights protesters and freedom riders and things like that. And she did organizing work and demonstrations around the civil rights legislation.
I wonder if her family knew it all.
Oh, we'll get to the family.
Oh, okay.
She was actually arrested during one of these demonstrations, and because her family was so well connected, in fact, her uncle was a congressperson who represented the district that Champaign, Illinois is in.
Oh, no, gosh. She probably just was popped out.
Her arrest made the papers.
Oh, shit.
And this marked the decline of her relationship with her father. He felt that she had disgraced the family by being part of this. And their relationship just continues to widen as she gets older. They basically just don't have much of a relationship by the time he dies.
Yeah, I couldn't see how they could.
Right. Yes, he definitely disagreed with. By the time he dies, I'm sure he disagreed with her on like 90% of everything.
Oh yeah.
So during her junior year of college, she really was pushing to be allowed to live off campus. You had to get permission to live off campus if you were a woman, and especially a disabled woman. And they were treated so differently also. Like, men were allowed to come and go out of their dorms they didn't have curfews or anything like that. And women had curfews. Women on campus had curfews. They were not allowed to be out on a weeknight past like 9, and they could be out past 1 a.m. on the weekends.
The hell?
And she really wanted to move off campus, partially because she had been told wrongly when she was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, which happened when she was 15, that she would die young. Oh. And so she was really like, I want to know what it's like to live on my own before I can't. She was still able to somewhat walk and take care of herself. And so she was like, I want to have a chance to like cook my own food and, do my own shit. Yeah. I want to be a full ass adult. So she had to ask permission to do this, right? The man in charge of the program told her he hated her activity and involvement in like left organizations. So he told her that he could tell she was getting weaker because of all of the protests she was participating in. Oh my gosh. And he implied that the only reason that she wanted to move off campus was so she could have sex.
So what if she does?
That's a good fucking reason to move off campus. What's your problem? And that's just so degrading.
It is.
But once again, her connections did prove fruitful, and she was allowed to move off campus because her family was really well connected. Eventually, Kitty just stopped attending classes, though. She had become so involved in politics and organizing and protests that school just sort of like didn't really matter.
Interesting.
It was very clear to her, I think, that her future lay in what she was already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that she didn't need a degree in English literature to do what she was doing.
Yeah. And also, like I said, she's all in. So if she's focused, she's focused.
And actually, she had become more and more... Talking about being all in, like she went from being a Republican to being a young Democrat to then being like, I'm not even a Democrat. And now at this point, she's in the Socialist Party.
Ooh.
And actually is a Trotskyist, which Frida Kahlo was as well. So,
yeah.
you know, it's pretty, like, at this point,
intense.
Kind of radical, right?
Yeah.
And so she was like, I don't need a fucking English degree. She dropped out just 8 credit hours shy of her degree. And she never went back.
Wow.
Instead, she moved to Chicago.
God, I bet that pissed her family off even more.
Oh, you know it. You know it.
Yeah.
She moved to Chicago, where she became very immersed in political activism. Chicago's always been a like really great center for activism and organizing work. Hello, Barack Obama. And she worked there as an anti-war organizer for the Young Social Alliance, which was the young or youth branch of the Socialist Workers' Party. And she also at this time started traveling around quite a bit, which is really cool. She went to Latin America, South America, Europe. She even met Hugo Blanco. Have you heard of him?
Hugo Blanco. Mm-mm.
I had not heard of him. He was a very famous Trotskyist at the time who had been exiled to Chile from his native Peru for his political activism.
Okay.
And so she actually got to visit him in prison.
Wow.
Yeah. By this point, Kitty identified as a Trotskyist as well. And that was a leftist ideology that favored power to the working class in a global way. Mm-hmm. Like all the working classes should be globally connected across countries, across languages, across cultures, and the working class should be given the power. So Kitty was also becoming more involved in the women's movement around this time, which had started to crop up, right? She'd been super involved in the anti-war movement, super involved in civil rights. Now she's in the women's movement. And she actually was put in charge as the coordinator of a coalition of women's groups in Chicago called the Women's Day Coalition. I'm not going to get too in the weeds with her activism stuff at this time, but I do want to share what the demands were of this coalition.
Okay.
This is in 1968.
So if you want to be part of this group.
So it's a coalition of different groups across the city of Chicago. So she's the one coordinating all of these groups. And they're coming forward with one specific agenda.
Okay.
And this was their demands in 1968. Free abortion on demand.
Oof.
This is before Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
It is illegal. And it was actually stemmed from a situation where a teenager had been raped by a cop.
Oh, geez.
And she was very anti-cop.
Mm-hmm.
She also, the coalition also demanded free 24-hour childcare and equal pay for equal work.
There you go. These are all great ideas.
These are all like ideas that I'm like, TikTok motherfuckers. Through these connections, she was also being introduced to gay women. And that would prove to be the start of her coming out journey.
Oh, okay.
Interestingly enough, she was having this awareness of the discrimination of being a woman and the discrimination of people who were poor, and people of color, but she hadn't yet conceptualized disability as an area of civil rights or discrimination. Mm-hmm. Because that was like, it had always been portrayed as an individual concern. Like, your legs don't work like everybody else's legs. Mm-hmm. That's a you problem. That's not a group problem.
Yeah.
And so she really hadn't yet conceptualized the idea of disability rights.
As well, I mean, their group is probably so fucking marginalized.
Yes. Although she wasn't, I mean, obviously being at the University of Illinois in Champaign in this program, she knew lots of other disabled people. Mm-hmm. You know, because I would have thought that at some point she would have become a little bit more aware of that during that time, especially with how active she was.
I wonder if she harbored a little bit too of that what her family ingrained in her of we're not going to make a fuss about it. She just put her head down and she made it happen for herself, but not thinking of talking about it in the open.
Yeah. Like nobody was talking about like, isn't it fucked up that we can't go to Ivy League schools?
Yeah.
It was like, that's a you problem.
Mm-hmm.
It was an individual issue. And even the people there, like she talked about, you know, like even folks that she ended up later on becoming involved in disability activism with from that school were always less radical than she was in regards to disability rights because I think the mentality of that program and the mentality that they had grown up in, where it's like, you need to be able to do everything yourself with no help.
No help.
So after a bad breakup with a boyfriend and a few moves around the country, Kitty wanted a fresh start. So she came out as a gay woman and moved to Berkeley/Oakland, California in 1972.
Oh, that's a big move.
It's a big move. But she loves Berkeley, Oakland. When she first arrived, she continued working for the Socialist Workers' Party, and her office was on Telegraph Avenue. And that is a really busy street, Telegraph. She lived about a mile from the office. So she lived on Telegraph, I think, as well.
Okay.
But she lived about a mile down the street. And so she had to go down Telegraph to get to her office. And by this point, she is, you know, mostly wheelchair bound. I think exclusively at this point. None of the streets had curb ramps.
Oh, no.
So in order for her to get to her office or get from her office to home, she had
in the street?
to be in the street.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes. Then when she got to the office, one of the organizers in the office would have to lift her into a pushchair and carry her in the chair up the flight of stairs. And then another comrade after work, because after work it was like crazy busy streets, another one would follow her home in a car to make sure she didn't get run over.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Couldn't he put her in the car and drive her?
Probably not, because at this point she talked about having like a really great fucking wheelchair.
Okay.
Which she interestingly got from the Jerry Lewis muscular dystrophy telethon. Do you remember when Jerry Lewis used to do those dumb telethons on TV?
Not really.
I vaguely have a recollection of it from when I was a child.
A telethon? Okay.
Yeah, where they would like have, you know, they would have like the bank of people answering phones and they would, you know, have like entertainment, but in between the entertainment would be these sad stories about these people who need help.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Kitty Cohn was on the damn show.
Oh, geez, and got a wheelchair?
Yeah, and that's how she got this really incredible wheelchair.
Nice.
However, she later on came to really understand that telethon was very much that paternalistic, infantilizing issue. Like, take pity on the paws, you know? So her wheelchair kept breaking down, though. This was one thing that was like bothering her.
Is this one that she has to do manually, or was it motorized?
It is a little motorized, I think.
Okay.
Based on what she was talking about it being very advanced.
Okay.
She said she thought it had been. The interview was from the mid to late 90s, and she's talking about this wheelchair and said it was the best wheelchair she's ever had, period.
Okay.
And she thought it was designed by a man who was a quadriplegic. So it was like designed by a disabled person for disabled people. Imagine that.
How wonderful it would be.
So she had this wheelchair that kept breaking down, and of course, not having a wheelchair would just it just completely destroyed her ability to do anything. So she kept having to take it to this place called Thrifty Rents to get it fixed. And this guy at Thrifty Rents one day was like, because they would have to send it off to the manufacturer to get it refixed, and then
she probably used it so much. I mean, it's
think about a car.
Yeah.
So imagine if every time your car broke down, you had to send it to the manufacturer and wait for it to come back.
That would fuck your life up.
Yes. So her, she cannot go anywhere. She can't do anything. She's just like homebound during that time and dependent on anyone else to come and get her. And there's no coordinated transportation for people with disabilities at this time. So she is at this Thrifty Rents. The guy at the Thrifty Rents is like, well, have you ever heard of the Center for Independent Living? And she's like, no, I don't know what that is. And he's like, well, they have a wheelchair repair shop and it's pretty great. You should just go down there. They'll have it done in a couple hours.
Oh, geez.
So she takes herself down to the Center for Independent Living and is like, what is this magical place?
Is it a candy store?
It is like that. It was like an all-encompassing center for folks with disabilities that was centered around the independent living movement, which was advocating for systemic changes in all areas of society and government and structural changes that would allow disabled folks to live independently and be supported.
Yeah, if you provide the environment for them, because they are part of this society, they should have the same freaking access that you do.
Right. So Kitty became very enamored with CIL immediately and began volunteering at CIL. And eventually she quit her work with the Socialist Worker Party and was hired to work in the Community Affairs Department at CIL. And at first she worked under a man named Hale Zukas, and Hale Zukas basically did everything.
That's quite a name.
Isn't it? Hale Zukas?
Hale Zukas.
Sounds like a god.
Yeah, right.
Hale Zukas had, I believe, cerebral palsy, and he had really advanced cerebral palsy.
Okay.
So his CP meant that not only was he wheelchair bound and had like a lot of issues with using a lot of his body, but it also affected his speech.
Okay.
So he was very difficult to understand. So she was his translator. Mm-hmm. She had to go to meetings with him and translate what he was saying to the people in the meetings. He would transcribe the things that he was saying so that, reports and stuff were written. And she used to get very frustrated because, she also had a hard time understanding it. But she ended up becoming, they were always together all the time. And so she ended up becoming really,
you kind of learn. I have one of my regulars, he has cerebral palsy. And just, after serving him for so many years, I can understand
I have
what
a
he's
student
asking
like
for.
that who I can usually understand when he's asking. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a little harder. But he was working on securing people benefits like Social Security income, attendant care, and also working on systemic stuff like mobility barriers, like having stairs where there should be a ramp. Mm-hmm. And Kitty took her own initiatives. As she became more involved with Hale, she started to kind of get her feet under her and start to feel like she knows what she's doing. And she started to take on her own initiatives, and the first thing she organized was the Committee for an Accessible Oakland.
Okay.
Because she was goddamn pissed about those fucking curb ramps. And she had tried to go to
that's her daily commute.
Mm-hmm. And she's having to fucking do it in the street.
Yeah.
And she tried to do all of the, because again, she's coming from this very privileged white background. And so she's like, all I have to do is go to Public Works and tell them this is the problem, right? And they'll fix it.
Nope.
They were like,
you're SOL. Yeah.
That costs too much money. We're not going to do that. So she's like, fuck that. And so she creates this coalition, and using those skills that she had built over the time that she lived in Chicago and elsewhere. I didn't talk about it, but she does actually briefly also lived in Atlanta and worked in Atlanta.
Wow.
So she had really great skills at building broad coalitions of various organizations to support a common cause, even if that didn't seem inherent to that person or that organization. So in her Committee for an Accessible Oakland, she got the Easter Seals group to sign on.
Easter Seals?
Yeah, they're like a charity organization. They used to have television commercials and stuff.
Okay.
And she also got the California Association of the Physically Handicapped. And they were eventually successful in pushing Oakland to put in some curb ramps, although every single street was its own separate struggle. Mm. They couldn't get a citywide.
Yeah. And little pockets, probably.
Yeah, she actually talked about how there was this one, there had been kind of a clash between wheelchair users and cane users and things like that, and the blind. Okay. Because they were saying that curb ramps would hurt the blind because their walking canes, their like sensory canes would not be able to tell when there's a ramp, and so they'd like fall.
Okay.
But that actually wasn't true.
I was going to say, is this an actual fact or?
No, it ended up being kind of a red herring, but because of that, there were a couple of streets where they did build the ramps like not at the edge of the corner. They built them like, if you think of like the corner, they would build it like a couple feet back. So
you
then
just have to keep
people would
sidewinding and.
So you would, if you were crossing a busy street, you would like be in the road still. So like defeated the purpose. You weren't in like the area that people would crosswalk. So there were a couple
Probably
streets.
makes it harder.
Yes. And there was like another street where they're like, well, we can't put curb ramps in because there are basements underneath.
Okay.
It's just like all this weird shit that they wanted to put in the way. It was just a struggle.
Yeah. Any reason to not do it.
So in her personal life, Kitty has now also met a woman and fallen in love. She was a Mexican woman named Alma Noriega, and Alma had moved to the States when she was like 11, but she had been born and raised in Mexico prior to that. And Alma had a daughter named Claudia, and I think she was around 5 or 6 when Kitty and her got together. And I'm not clear on what the choice, like, you know how we were talking about like Kitty just goes head first in things?
Yeah.
So she just quit her job and moved to Mexico with Alma.
Oh. So that's all in.
Yeah, all in.
Yeah.
All in. She U-hauled that shit.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that kind of
to another country? So she and Alma and Alma's daughter Claudia moved to Mexico. They actually lived in Manzanillo, I believe. Something like that.
I've heard of that before. I'm not quite sure where it's at, but
yeah, it was I can't remember where I looked it up on a map, but I can't quite recall. But she really loved that area. So in 1975, the three of them moved there, and she just basically becomes a housewife.
Okay. All of her work and like just gonna jump off the ship.
I guess.
Okay.
She just hit that pause button and just became a housewife.
Also from her perspective, she's thinking she's on borrowed time.
Yes.
So I could maybe understand, you're in love, you've got a chance, maybe just go for it. Maybe that's why she is just go for it, go for it, go for it.
I think so. I think she always went, really full on into stuff because, you might as well.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how long you're going to be here.
Yeah.
And she loved Mexico. Loved Mexico. Loved living there, loved the food, loved culture. She spoke Spanish. Like she learned Spanish while she was there and became fluent in Spanish.
Wow.
And she really loved being Claudia's other mother. And however, I will say that it's somewhere around like late college, she started to drink heavily.
Okay.
And her and Alma were just fucking drunk a lot.
Oh, okay.
So she later on was like, I don't know that we were great moms to Claudia because we were drunk a lot.
Okay.
So I don't think that really worked well for their relationship over time either, because they did eventually break up. And Kitty moved back to Oakland and picked up where she left off in her activism work. She soon became one of the key leaders at CIL, and she was organizing lobbying for disability rights across the spectrum, from housing to benefits to access to mobility transportation. And her moment in the spotlight came in 1977. So I have to back up for just a second and talk about 504.
Okay.
Now, in 1973, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was signed into law. This was the first federal civil rights protection for people with disabilities.
Okay.
504 said that no program or entity that receives federal funds could discriminate against someone with a disability.
Okay.
So schools, courthouses, anything that had federal funding could not discriminate against people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But like many civil rights laws before it, it was pretty toothless because it didn't have any specific regulations or enforcements or timelines.
Yeah, so if like you can say that till you're blue in the face, but what are the actual regulations? And if those are broken, where do you go from there?
Right. And civil rights had the same problem. When the civil rights legislation was passed, that's where they had to go back and do things like the Voting Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act, because
you can't just do this blanket statement.
Yeah, you've got to be able to have some fucking enforcement there and some regulations. So there were all kinds of like nebulous things happening because there was nothing specific in the legislation. So here are some examples. This is her talking about this time. There was one case involving the right of a wheelchair user to use public buses, in which the decision was that if a driver stopped and opened the doors, that constituted non-discrimination.
But they could drive on by.
And they were stairs. So you couldn't get on the fucking bus, but just opening the door, that was non-discrimination. They allowed the opportunity for you to get on.
So once again, figure it out.
Another case acknowledged that steps prevented a wheelchair user from boarding. So these are two different cases that have the same problem at the center of them with two completely different outcomes. Mm-hmm. And that illustrated the problem with why they needed to define what discrimination was. What did that look like? And what are the regulations and things you have to do to enforce this? The Department of Health, Education, Welfare, HEW, was the agency that was supposed to be the one that issued guidance on 504. So they were supposed to tell federal agencies, this is what you need to do in order to be in compliance.
Okay.
But between 1973, when 504 was put into law, and 1977, no regulations had been put into place.
How many years is that?
4.
4 years. Okay.
4 years with nothing, no guidance whatsoever. And that's why they're having these cases where things are just completely wild. So that isn't to say that there weren't regulations that had been drafted. In fact, the Office for Civil Rights had sent specific recommendations to HEW that said, like, this is what you should do. This is how this should be. Like, there should be curb ramps on city streets, and there should be ramps that are accessible to go into schools.
If you're going to be a multi-story building, there has to be wheelchair access to an elevator or a lift or something like that.
And there was delay after delay after delay. The Disability Rights Committee was really pushing, the community was really pushing for the regulations to be published for public comment, because they were waiting. They were really worried that there was going to be like a watering down of stuff.
Okay.
And so they were waiting. They had finally come up with a draft of regulations. Things were finally moving forward. A compromise was made. And the regulations were waiting for the new HEW secretary, because the Carter administration was coming into office.
Okay.
And he was a Democrat. And they felt like, here's our chance. So all the new secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare had to do, his name was Joseph Califano, was sign it.
Okay. And then onward.
Yeah.
And he didn't?
No.
Okay.
So it became very clear that Califano wasn't going to do what he was supposed to do. Instead, the Carter administration set up a task force to quote unquote study the regulations that had been drafted, but they didn't put a single disabled person on the task force. And it became very clear that they had no intention of following through these regulations and had definitely planned to gut them.
Yeah.
Because in the background, what had been happening was all of these universities and things like that had been like gathering together and quietly talking to the administration and stuff like that, being like, well, we can't do this.
Yeah.
This is going to be too costly.
Yeah. And they have some weight and they have some pull.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if all the universities
just said no?
Just said like, well, we really won't be able to do that. It's like schools, universities, medical facilities. They were all like, well, we won't be able to do this. So essentially what they were going to do in these regulations is put forward a separate but equal approach. In the fucking...
Are you kidding me?
Late 70s.
Oh my gosh.
So the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities was formed, and they were a cross-coalition of groups from all over the country that were interested in pushing forward disability rights. And they were pressuring the administration and the Democratic Party because, hello.
Yeah.
And the ACCD demanded that the Department of Health and Education and Welfare issue the regulations unchanged by April, or there would be some actions taken by the coalition. And of course, HEW did not comply. So behind the scenes, Kitty and many other activists were preparing for and organizing for action. Organizing with people, I didn't even think about this. Like, organizing is something I'm very familiar with. I've done it. Mm-hmm. So you contact lots of organizations, you set up like times and dates and facilities and so on and so forth. But organizing people with disabilities has a whole other set of challenges to it that I, as an abled person, would not have fucking thought of, and therefore it's like clearly a blind spot I have in terms of my own activist work. Like, she had to make sure that there was notifications for people who were deaf or hard of hearing or blind.
Yeah.
How do you get through to them? The teletypes, the Braille, like having everything translated into Braille. Organizing transportation because there wasn't widespread paratransit, right? Medical care, having medications and people like attendants, personal care attendants.
My mind didn't even go there.
Right.
Yeah.
How about the problem they're having, right, is that like things aren't accessible. So like, what about bathrooms?
Yep. All of it.
Just like fucking basic ass shit that I would not think of. I didn't think of. It didn't come to me.
Yeah.
So Kitty was on all of that shit. And not only was she instrumental in organizing across these various areas, but she also was reaching out to other civil organizations to assist them and support them. Because that's one of her strong suits, is this cross coalition building.
Yeah.
And so she was reaching out to like trade unions, churches, the Black Panthers, the NAACP, the National Organization for Women, labor councils, and they fucking came through.
What a brilliant idea.
Mm-hmm. In fact, she told us an incredible story about the Machinists Union that I'll talk about. So within the disability organizations, Kitty and other leaders also set up committees so that everybody had a role to play and people were on roles. So they would handle things like media, fundraising, medics, publicity, that kind of stuff. So they were fucking ready.
Yeah.
So on April 5th, 1977, activists gathered at federal buildings across the country and held rallies. At the end of the rally, the groups moved into the buildings and occupied them.
Oh.
So I'm going to show you a clip of a documentary made by the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund called The Power of 504, and it is narrated by Kitty Cohn. So if you want to watch it, it's only 18 minutes long. I highly recommend it because it's an area of American history I think that we just have literally never heard of.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play this little clip for you from the documentary.
Here in San Francisco. It all started this morning here at the old Federal Building on 50 Fulton when an incident took place outside. Immediately after that demonstration this morning, the handicapped started invading the building. It's the old Federal Building, which is now the HEW headquarters. They spent most of the day in the office of the regional director here.
And I've just gotten word too that these people are now locked into the building. At 6 o'clock this building did close down. However, about a half hour ago they came up with an agreement. None of these people are going to be arrested or moved out of this building. Some members of the HEW staff will be remaining here with them throughout the night. Those people who are here right now will be locked in. If they want to leave, it's all right, but they can't come back in. Food, we hear, is being brought over by Delancey Street. However, the Salvation Army has not been able to come up with blankets or cots, that sort of thing, so they are still frantically out looking for that.
What about the restroom facilities and that sort of thing there? Are they equipped to handle that many handicapped people, and could they get that help?
They absolutely are not equipped to handle them. The regional director asked before 4 o'clock if he could try to get out of this room because he needed to go to the restroom. And the group here said, no, we have had to learn all of our lives to control our bladders, and you must learn that lesson now, too.
I think my favorite part of that is that clap back at the end.
Yeah, that they've had to learn their whole lives. How to, like, you don't even know. You don't even know, bro.
How to control your bladder.
Yeah.
So those demonstrations in the other cities were over in that day. But the occupiers in San Francisco stayed. Day after day after day, they stayed. And the HEW responded by doing really shitty things, like cutting off the phone lines.
Okay.
So they couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get messages out. But here's what they didn't take into consideration.
What?
There are people in there who were sign language.
Oh, shit!
Who spoke sign language.
Yeah.
And people outside who could read sign language.
There you go.
And they were just communicating through the windows.
Yeah.
And so if they needed like food or medicine, they would communicate via sign language through the windows.
Yeah.
Fucking brilliant.
Very.
They underestimated them. So they also, though, at one point cut off the hot water to the 4th floor, which is where they were. So that's really shitty. And they even so it's like gaining all of this momentum, and like it's day after day after day, it's becoming bigger and bigger news.
Yeah.
And so lots of like important people are getting involved and like trying to help them. And one of them was the mayor of San Francisco, who wanted to set up a portable shower in the bathroom. Like it was like where you just hook up hoses to the sink.
Yeah.
And that's what they were trying to do. But the fucking HEW said no. And when the reporters asked the mayor after he hung up the phone, like, why was the reasoning? He said, because he's not running a motel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And one of the things I thought that was really interesting in the documentary and in some of the other stuff I read was that when they arrived at this building, none of the employees could even tell them what 504 was. They're in charge of enforcing it.
That is horrible.
And that therein lies the problem, right?
Yeah.
They didn't even know what it was.
It's not even on their radar.
So the man in charge, though, the one who's actually able to sign these regulations, is not in San Francisco. He's in D.C., right? It's the secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare.
Okay.
So if they really want to get their fucking stuff done, they need to go to D.C. But these San Francisco protesters are occupying this building, and they don't want to let it go. So the decision was made to send a coalition of some of the activists and organizers from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. to protest at the HEW headquarters, and specifically Joseph Califano's office, and try to get a meeting with President Carter. Mm-hmm. So Kitty was chosen to be one of those people. Nearly 2 weeks into the demonstration, a special congressional hearing was convened to hear from the activists who were in D.C. One of those was a woman named Judy Heumann, who I haven't mentioned yet, but she's probably the most well-known disability rights activist of this time.
Okay.
And was working very closely with Kitty the whole time. I would say more famous and more important in a lot of ways than Kitty ever would be. But Judy, I think, has gotten a little bit more
of that spotlight.
Yes.
Well, not spotlight, but...
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, she was actually, I think, in the Clinton administration.
Oh, okay.
So she, had a little bit more of a voice than Kitty had. So I do want to mention her and not leave her out because she is extremely important. I also think her voice is important, and just a voice of people at this time, because, I'm telling the story and it's not my story to tell. So I want to make sure that I'm including some of their voices. Okay. So I want to show you and include a snippet of her in this congressional hearing. She's very emotional. It's hard to watch it without yourself feeling emotional, but it's her discussing these issues in this congressional hearing, which is full of these white men. Mm-hmm. And she absolutely she's also the one who said you're going to learn how to control your bladder. Mm-hmm. She's got some clapback skills. Ooh. And you're going to hear one of her best ones.
The harassment, the lack of equity that has been provided for disabled individuals, and that now is even being discussed by the administration, is so intolerable that I can't quite put it into words. I can tell you that every time you raise issues of separate but equal, the outrage of disabled individuals across this country is going to continue. It is going to be ignited. There will be more takeovers of buildings until finally maybe you begin to understand our position. We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. We want the law enforced. We want no more segregation. We will accept no more discussion of segregation. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
Whoa.
Powerful.
Very.
And
you can
also,
just see, like, she's bubbling, like, physically pissed.
yes. Like, she's emotional in that way that is, like, so righteous. Like, righteous anger. And you can't even... The pain and the anger is palpable.
And don't sit there and shake your head in agreement because you have no fucking idea.
And he's just back there like... Mm-hmm.
It's very condescending.
It is condescending. I'm like, it's that paternalistic bullshit.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
So the protest, and especially this kind of stuff, gets national news coverage. And this is the first time in U.S. history when a disabled person is allowed to talk about disabled issues on television. Period. Wow. Isn't that just breathtaking?
In 1977. Wow.
And it was like finally being seen not just by these activists, but by the country as an actual civil rights issue.
Because like you said, it's on nobody's radar.
No one's. And now it's being seen as a civil rights issue. And Kitty later talked about like just the idea that some, kid in Nebraska is sitting at home watching the national news and seeing for the first time that there could be a future that he hadn't envisioned before. Mm-hmm. I thought that was so powerful. So after 28 days of occupying the federal building in San Francisco...
It's a long-ass time.
Without access to proper medical care. And I want you to think about, like, these are people with severe, sometimes very complex issues, medical issues, who had gone without proper medical care, without consistent food, without showers, without sleep, because they were often like organizing well into the night. Those committees would be meeting to try to organize things to make sure to take care of people. And after multiple demonstrations outside Califano's home, they went to his actual house.
Oh, shit.
And outside the White House, the disability rights activists were victorious. And Joseph Califano signed the regulations into law on April 28th, 1977. When they returned to San Francisco, Kitty Cohn was one of the people asked to give a victory speech. So I want to include a portion of her very impassioned speech. The whole speech is about 5 minutes. I would love to include the whole thing, but you guys would be listening to it for the whole 5 minutes. So I'm going to include a little bit, about 90 seconds of it.
We showed strength and courage and power and commitment. Solidarity. That we, the shut-in or the shut-out, we, the hidden, supposedly the frail and the weak, that we could wage a struggle at the highest level of government and win. We said this government can't afford civil rights for some citizens and not for others. We brought new feelings of self-confidence and pride, not only to ourselves, but to the thousands and thousands of other disabled people who were with us in spirit if they could not be with us in body. And we have helped to win the future for millions of disabled children who will no longer have to face no education, or segregated education, or an adulthood on welfare segregated from the rest of society. I think that we have written a new page in American history, and we have renewed the old belief in the right and responsibility of people who are oppressed to take matters into their own hands, and that by taking matters into our own hands, victory is possible.
How amazing is that?
Right. She's a very powerful speaker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I really liked her speech. I've listened to the whole thing probably 4 times.
I really do like how she talked about the children, At that moment in time, they're changing the opportunities for these children who are coming up behind them.
Yes.
Which is amazing.
It is. It's incredible. And the 504 sit-in was and still is the longest nonviolent occupation of a federal building in U.S. history. And Kitty Cohn is credited as the, quote, organizational brains behind the action. But Kitty was obviously not done. She's still a relatively young woman at this time. It's 77. She was born in 45 or 44. So she's only in her 30s. Mm-hmm. And now she was pushing organizations to enforce these regulations.
Well, yeah, because you can have your day, but then it's get to work.
So the biggest issue when she returned to California was public transportation and public transit. And so she helped organize more public demonstrations and was part of developing the Disability Law Resource Center in 1978. And she also became more involved in lobbying efforts at the state and national level. But in her personal life, Kitty was feeling pretty restless. Her relationship with Alma Noriega had ended a while ago, and her longing to be a mother had not. So years and years and years ago, when she was leaving Chicago, she had gone to a doctor to see about getting pregnant. He had treated her like she was absolutely absurd for even
she
bringing
had two
it up.
heads or something.
And also, he basically implied that she was evil if she wanted to get pregnant, because why would she want somebody else to have muscular dystrophy?
Holy shit.
So she had tubal ligation done. So it's no longer possible for her to be a biological mother. Mm-hmm. So the only real outlet for her to become a mother is to adopt. And in 1979, she's in a committed relationship with a blind woman named Kathy Martinez. And she's very much set on the idea of having a child. And Kitty knew she had to do an adoption, but the U.S. adoption agencies were still very discriminatory towards people with disabilities. They have to do home studies, right? Like when Abby and I became foster parents, we had to have our home studied.
Yeah.
And so if they feel like you're incapable of taking care of a child, they won't let you have one.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to see.
They're the ones that make the decision, yeah.
If you're, I mean, the way people treated them, like there's just no way there would be this open arms for someone with disabilities to become a parent.
How could you possibly be a parent?
That's right. I mean, they had a hard time with like single people. I thought that was incapable. So Kitty knew that she was going to need to look outside the U.S. and had heard that it was actually a little bit easier to adopt a child in Mexico, but you had to live in Mexico to adopt a child. So that's what she did. She moved back to Mexico.
And she loved it down there. So.
She did. She actually ended up moving to the Tijuana area because even though everybody else hated Tijuana, but for her, it was just a better option for her because it is very close to California. And there's all kinds of stuff, all kinds of logistical reasons that had to do with, some of it had to do with disability and stuff like that for her to live there. And Kathy is Mexican-American, Kathy Martinez, her partner. And she did eventually adopt a son in Mexico, and his name was Jorge. She loved him deeply and wholly, and he became the center of her universe. While her relationship with Kathy didn't end up lasting, her adoption of Jorge was obviously permanent. And in 1984, she moved back to California with Jorge. She worked at the World Institute of Disabilities and then returned to CIL again. Mm-hmm. But by this point, she didn't speak very fondly of CIL in the second round. I think they were less radical because they had gotten so much publicity. I think they'd also gotten a lot of money.
Oh.
And they weren't really pushing for that on-the-ground social change that she wanted to see. And then she eventually settled at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund in 1990. While Kathy eventually retired from official work in 1999, she remained active in demonstrations, protests, and more up until her death. In fact, her very last Facebook post was about the dangers of fracking. She died on March 21st, 2015, at the age of 70 from pancreatic cancer. Her son Jorge was by her side. So Kitty Cohn was a fierce advocate not only for the parts of herself that needed fighting for, being a woman, being gay, being disabled, but also for racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice, and much more. And it became very clear to me through even listening and reading and stuff, all of the stuff she was talking about, even in the 90s, that I know hasn't changed. You know, that we have a long way to go on the issue of disability rights. A long, long, long way to go. And I'm thankful that I now know about Kitty Cone and the 504 sit-in and the fight to become a disability movement.
Yeah.
This is a piece of history that I literally knew nothing about.
Neither did I. And
that makes me pretty angry. Because, like, I know what a 504 plan is as a teacher, but I didn't know where it came from. I just knew it was an accommodation.
Yeah.
Like, I just knew, like, when I got a 504 plan in my mailbox that I had to make an accommodation for a kid. But I never considered, like, who started that?
Yeah, the work that went behind that.
Where did that come from? I am physically abled in most ways, although I do have my own set of... I'm a chronically ill person. I also have Meniere's, which causes hearing loss, and I have some eye trouble. So, you know, I'm not... I don't have muscular dystrophy, but, like, I'm mostly able-bodied in most ways. And it became very obvious to me that I need to really work on that part of myself, on starting to really understand and take that in consideration. So I want to end with someone else talking about Kitty Cone instead of me. This is a video, a short video that the Smithsonian's Women's History section did. This is a profile that they did, a really small profile on Kitty Cone. And there's a student named Ren who has a cane in the shot. And that person is interviewing Catherine Ott, one of the museum's curators, about why Kitty Cone's work matters. So I'm going to end with Ren talking about Kitty Cone.
That it took that long.
We're nowhere near where we should be with disability rights.
You're telling me? There's still places I have to walk in the back entrance of because I can't get up the steps. And the only thing in the front is steps. So I don't know that there's really any better way to visualize the getting pushed aside than, no, you can't walk up this way. You can't walk in the front door.
So another part of when they were inside during that month-long sit-in, people didn't have their personal assistants often with them. So they learned to change each other's leg bags and to administer medication. They were there for each other, but they were risking their lives because of some of the nature of some of the disabilities people had. They could have died.
Putting your body and your mind, your whole self on the line, because I know what it's like to be without things that you need medically. It's kind of one of the most awesome exchanges of trust that you can have with another human being is saying, hey, here's what I need in order to keep living. Can you help me?
Oh, the severity of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was just telling that Ren said, even today I can't go into building. I have to come in the back entrance. Like, why haven't we fixed that?
You would think it wouldn't be a thing anymore.
Yes, but it very much is a thing. Yeah, it's very much a thing.
Oh, did I ever tell you that, I don't know if I did, that I learned sign language?
No.
I took 4 years of sign language in high school.
Awesome. I've always wanted to learn sign language.
We had Spanish, French, and sign language, and I was like, why not? I was like, that's something that could possibly be useful someday. And the amount of joy on people who speak sign language when you can conversate with them, they're like, oh my God. Like, could you imagine just being so happy that someone can talk to you?
Yeah. That like, if you communicate with them, they're, you know, you're going to actually hear what they want.
Yeah.
Instead of guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely. I'm glad you've learned that. Have you retained it?
Most of it, a lot of it is finger signing, which is like the individual letters of spelling or finger spelling.
Yeah.
Because I forgot like a lot of my action signs, because like you can have different signs for different things, but then you incorporate them all into like one ball and it's one fluid movement. So that I'm a little iffy on. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a sign language program in the high school that I teach at, and I always love to watch students learn how to sign. It's just cool. It's just really cool.
Neat. Yeah.
Well, that is the story of Kitty Cone.
Oh, fascinating.
Great, right?
Right? Yeah.
So let me tell you about my sources. So the major source that I used, that I said, like I said, was over 300 pages, was actually a transcript of an interview that was done by David Landis of Kitty Cone, and it was over the course of 2 years, from 1996 to 1998, and it is online through the Regional Oral History Office's Disability Rights and Independent Living Movement Oral History Series for the University of California.
Say that 5 times fast.
I also found an old article that Kitty herself had written, which was called A Short History of the 504 Sit-In. And I used Wikipedia just to double check on dates and stuff, because some of this stuff was very overwhelming. After reading 300 pages, I was having trouble like narrowing it down. Mm-hmm. That Smithsonian video, which is also on YouTube. The Disability Rights and Education Defense Fund. Celebrating Kitty Cone by Lainey Feingold on beyondcron.com. Kitty Cone's victory speech was hosted on SoundCloud by Times a Wastin'. A New York Times obituary by Wendy Liu, which was part of their Overlooked No More series. Patient No More, Kitty Cone from the Longmore Institute on YouTube, and The Power of 504, the documentary by the Disability Rights and Education Defense Fund.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
Love it.
If anybody has any comments to make or corrections that I need to make, please let me know, because it's important to me to get this right.
I think you did great.
Well, I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for that freaking
history lesson.
Slap in the face.
Well, thank you everybody for listening, and don't forget there is a Patreon episode up. I actually made it public and available to everyone because I thought it was important.
Yep. Well, also thank you to our editor, Lucas McIntyre.
And to the lovely Jennifer Finch for our kick-ass theme music.
Ooh, till next time.
Yes, it's a good one. Goodbye, everyone.